We have an offering basket there in the back behind the camera, if you can help us out there. If you are not currently on our database where you receive email announcements of our meetings or anything else on our schedule, there is a paper in the table back there that you can sign up to do that. All we need is your name and your email, but you can also access information about our activities on our website. And there's, in fact, there are also business cards which have our email address and our website address on it, along with a little bit more information about us. Not a lot, it's a business card, but it's there. We also have our lending library. We have a few DVDs, and then we have some magazines and books. If you want to grab something before you leave, please do so. Just bring it back the next meeting you come to. We'd appreciate that. I would like to ask, let's see, Michael, could you please open the prayer for us?
What's up, Curtis? Father God, thank you for assembling ourselves together in your name and study science from a godly perspective of creation, and make sure you get the glory for it. Thank you for Mr. Williams coming this year. His knowledge with the hydroponic theory, but it's strengthened our faith, and it also enabled us to reach out to other people who may be struggling because of this topic, and then also anyone comes to bring in the lost for whom this might be a stumbling block. But anyway, thank you for the fellowship that meets here. Thank you for everybody's participation. Bless our fellowship. In Jesus' name, amen.
So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Fred. So a little bit of his background first before I talk about the presentation. So Fred is associated with the Rocky Mountain Creation Fellowship in the Denver area, Littleton, and they meet the second Friday of the month, second Friday of every month. So they are not meeting this weekend, the second Saturday for us, but it's not the second Friday. So they're meeting next weekend, and they have Don DeYoung, I think, speaking. I'm sure it's some astronomy or physics subject or something along those lines. I don't remember what it is, but again, up in the Denver area. Fred also does Real Science Radio. They've been doing that for a number of years. They originally did it with Bob Vineyard, and of course Bob passed, and so now Fred has taken over that main role in that. But he was also working with Bob for a long time. Fred's been doing presentations for a number of years. I guess probably dates back to when he was a kid almost, right? Young man, it says 30 plus years here. So you're only 50, right? Yeah. Sure. He's a little older than that. Okay. His background is computer science and software engineering, and so I think you're still working, correct? Okay. Works with his son, I think.
I do.
Works with his son, so it's kind of nice. Sons following fathers. Fred's presentation today is the hydroplate theory. It's astounding confirmed predictions. This presentation is based upon Dr. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, which demonstrates it to be one of the best explanations for Earth's geological features. Depending on whether you're a CPT or a hydroplate person, you think it's more so than the other. So it'll be a good opportunity for us to have maybe some discussion after. I have my own questions, but anyways. So really, one of the key things that Fred will be focusing on is its predictive capability and explanatory power in terms of how the flood occurred and different processes of the flood. And just as a note, and we'll be mentioning it more afterwards, is we're going to have a second presentation on this theory in 2 months, which will focus more on the solar system aspects of it versus the, I'll say, the geology aspects, although Fred will touch on both. So with that, let's welcome Fred. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It really is an honor to be here. I'm sorry that, with Bob's passing, now he's with the Lord. He was going to give this talk a little while ago. So, a year ago. Was it a year ago? Okay. Oh, you're right. It would have been, yeah. A year ago, September. Yeah, and I was going to give this talk in June, and then I came down with COVID. So luckily I'm not superstitious. So anyways, I think it's a real coup that you've got Rob Brown, Dr. Rob Brown. Walt Brown's son is going to be speaking in 2 months. And I think he'll also be in Denver, our group, which is such a blessing that it sounds like he's getting ready to start opening up his ministry. So I'm going to go through kind of a general view of the hydroplate theory. I'm also going to spend some time going through plate tectonics and catastrophic plate tectonics and why I don't think it's correct. So as we get started here, I did want to mention Walt Brown, Dr. Walt Brown. In my opinion, it'd be really hard to argue for a creation scientist who has better credentials than Walt Brown. So he got his degree at West Point, where he went to West Point, and then he got his his PhD at MIT. And his discipline was heat transfer. So that's pretty prestigious, but not only that though, he was the team lead at Benet Labs. They had 450 people report to him, and that included 40 PhD scientists. You don't become a team lead or a director normally in my field of engineering, in my world of engineering, without being really competent. So this guy not only has the credentials, but he also has a career to back up his impressiveness among his peers. So he actually taught at the Air War College. The Air Force Academy wanted him, and so the Pentagon granted him a service change, and so then he was a professor in rocket science at the Air Force Academy. Then he eventually retired as a full colonel, and he went to work for ICR with Henry Morris. So that's where just a little bit of politics come in here, and I want to explain this. So there was some tension, and it kind of explains why there's somewhat of a rift. So I'll say what Dr. Henry Morris said here. He said, there were problems, however, Dr. Brown is strong-minded and independent, and necessary restrictions imposed by San Diego control were a hindrance. And so at that time, ICR was in San Diego. They had a really good office there. Furthermore, a considerable part of his seminars was being taken up with his own rather detailed model of geophysical causes and phenomena of the flood, so the hydroplate theory. While we were not opposed to such a model, we were not ready to endorse it. So here's the thing with what's going on there. Walt Brown was giving talks, seminars, like I'm giving a talk today. You know, he would have a lot of people at his talks, and then they'd ask questions at the end of his talks. I'm like, what about, well, Dr. Brown, what about the vapor canopy theory? And he's like, well, there's physics problems with it. You know, I don't agree with it. And then those certain people would then complain to ICR, he's not pushing the canopy theory. Because that was the modus operandi at that time, was the canopy theory. So really, the rift, that's what, whoops, I'm hitting the laser instead of getting used to the, thank you for letting me borrow you. So, the canopy theory. Many Christians at the time, Christians even today, if you ask like a pastor who's over 40 years old about what, you know, if you ask them about Noah's flood and science, a lot of them are going to think the canopy theory is still true, actually. But it was disproven long ago. Walt Brown was the first one to disprove the canopy theory. It caused a rift with ICR, but ICR about 10 years later actually realized he was right. But unfortunately, the damage was already done. And I like what Bobby and Eric said here. Walt Brown warned the Christian movement about the error of the canopy theory, the wasted years of effort, and the spreading of misinformation. And for that, Walt took one for the team. No deed goes unpunished. And once the relationship soured, they've been tough ever since. Now, late in Henry Morris's life, he regretted that rift because Henry Morris it sounded like he kind of was starting to go on board with the hydroplate theory because of his background in hydraulics. So let's go through the two right now. We're going to talk about both of these theories, but I'm going to start with catastrophic plate tectonics. But if you just do a general overview, I believe it's pretty overwhelming that hydroplate theory wins when you look at the biblical text. I think the science behind it is, you know, you can make up your minds today what you think. I think the science is much more in line with the hydroplate theory. And which one's predictive? Very few predictions of catastrophic plate tectonics. There's a lot with the hydroplate theory, and we're going to go through those today. Okay, so let's first talk about plate tectonics. There's three main arguments that they use, and then the main arguments, and they've got sub-arguments under these. And perhaps the biggest one is that the seafloor is spreading, so they think they have evidence for that. And then plate subduction, and then rising magma. And we're going to go through those. Seafloor is spreading, so they found that their rocks were older on the continents than they were at the mid-Atlantic ridge. And so, hey, that's evidence that the seafloor is spreading. This is what an evolutionist said. Indeed, we have yet to find rocks older than 200 million years in the deep oceans. These observations led to a rapid acceptance of plate tectonic hypothesis. So it was one of their main evidences to support their theory. So I found this back when I first gave this talk to the Denver Society of Creation. This is a quote from a paleontologist scientist who wrote this: "Plate tectonic understanding of seafloor spreading maintains that Jurassic recent crust below the oceans is basaltic." And basalt is, a volcanic rock. Apart from local occurrences of extended continental crust adjacent to continents. However, abundant samples of continental material, some as old as Precambrian, Paleozoic, have been cored and dredged from deep oceans. Paleontologists should assert priority of their data over plate tectonic model. Okay, so here's what Christian Smoot said. Now, who's Christian Smoot? He's a scientist for the U.S. Navy. He spent most of his career mapping the floor of the ocean, and that data, it was classified. And, many years later, it eventually became declassified. This guy is an evolutionist. He started off as he was fervently a supporter of plate tectonics. But when he mapped the ocean floor, that eventually we all got to see, he became a huge critic of plate tectonics because the ocean floor did not match a single prediction or expectation of plate tectonics. He saw nothing there. Now, he's a little bit hard here. I don't hold this view against creationists who support catastrophic plate tectonics, but he says that among Earth scientists, the purveyors of plate tectonics are the present-day snake oil salesmen. I'm quoting him in his view of plate tectonics. I would not endorse that with the creation speakers who support catastrophic plate tectonics. I just want to make that clear. He says that plate tectonics is fraught with misinformation and misconceptions. The mid-ocean ridge spreading does not occur universally, especially in Iceland and the North Pacific Basin. Continental drift is a figment of overly active imaginations. So he's talking about, and we'll talk about the mid-oceanic ridge in a little bit. Okay. And he spent, it's 32 years, and he had 67 cruises where he developed all these maps for the U.S. Navy. Okay, so now let's talk about subduction. That's another big part of plate tectonics, and it's part of catastrophic plate tectonics. And the supporter, the guy who originally proposed catastrophic plate tectonics was Dr. John Baumgartner. He's very credentialed himself. He's got a geophysics degree from UCLA, a PhD. He's a great guy, he loves the Lord. We're going to disagree on his view of catastrophic plate tectonics. But he has been quoted as saying, and I didn't provide the quote here, but he has been quoted saying in the past, it was his goal, he felt he was led by God to get plate tectonics into the Bible. He did say that. So he's taken a secular view that he believes is correct, and he believes it should go in the Bible. So, Brian Nichols is a mechanical engineer and really well respected at his company. He's a senior mechanical engineer. He's done a lot of work to show how plate subduction just can't work. So if you imagine taking a sheet and bending it over like this, and imagine, by the way, plate subduction is, they say that from the oceanic ridge, the ocean plates are spreading, and then they subduct. They go down into the ground underneath the continental crust. That's what plate tectonics says happened over millions of years. And then today, at the pace of a fingernail growing, and maybe 1 or 2 inches a year, there's a subduction going on. So in real world subduction, you'd have to have like this curve here. But this is one of the things that Christian Smoot, he didn't find any of these wrinkles that you'd expect if this is really happening. They just don't exist. And then you've got these arc and cuff. Let me go to, whoops. So here you've got these arcs and cuffs, like you've got here, arc, cusp. And he's asking, there should be a break, a tear. That's simple mechanical engineering. You can't get around it. Yet there's no evidence of that on the seafloor, none at all. And even with the seismic topology that they do, tomography that they do, they don't see any evidence of that. I think this is powerful evidence against plate subduction. And then Walt Brown did calculations on, is there enough physics, does physics support the ability for a plate to go into the earth? And so he did all kinds of math, and Brian Nichol and others have peer-reviewed this math and don't find any issues with it. So who's going to win this tug of war with all that pressure that's going against the plates, the plate that's trying to subduct? And when you do the math, the resistant forces are 30 times greater than the plate coming in. So physically it can't happen. Okay, this is back to Christian Smoot. He noted this: deep earthquakes do not define a descending slab. In fact, do not even occur in most places along the trenches. Therefore, subduction does not occur. Plate tectonics does not work. Okay, so I did want to show this because this is a slide that Dr. Clary likes to show in his presentation to support catastrophic plate tectonics. He shows this P-wave tomography. Now, I've been meaning to contact him. He doesn't correctly cite the work. He cites a study from 2014. This image actually comes from a study back in 1997. So, one of the things I want to explain about this is, so you've got, he says that this is a slab, and if you notice, he says the blue shows colder ocean lithosphere descending down into the mantle. So this would be warmer rock, this would be colder rock. But just so you understand how this stuff works, they send seismic waves, and then they have listening devices, and earthquakes all around the world, they've got these seismic things that can read whenever an earthquake occurs. So they'll run all that data through software. Very complex software. They try to get as many data points as they can. But what you got to realize with the seismic waves, all they can do is detect velocity. They don't know that this is cold, really. They assume it is because sonic waves travel faster through more solid, dense rock, which could be colder. So it's an assumption for Clary to say that this is colder rock. But evolutionists make the same assumption. But what I want to convey is, we don't know, there's no way you can really know that that's cold rock unless you can actually see it. But the problem with this type of science, often it's improperly compared to CAT MRI scans. We know with that kind of system, you can actually black box test it, you can confirm whether or not your data was correct. We can't put the Earth under a microscope. So there's no way you can compare those two. Okay, now today, and I've talked to like my cousin-in-law, if you can call him that, he's married to my cousin. He works in oil and gas. I've talked to a guy online. They don't use this technology as much. More of what they use now is what's called full waveform inversion. And I pulled up a couple of slides just to show you kind of what that looks like. So they still use some of the seismic data, and then they run it through a different program to try to improve on what they're seeing under the earth. Now on the left-hand side, you'll see they've got examples. For example, this is supposed to be a subducting plate. This is supposed to be the Atlantic subducting plate. This is supposed to be a subducting plate. So you can see that doesn't look as pretty as Clary's perfectly, subducting plate. This is the 3D output of that software program. Now, can you really conclude that, that proves plate tectonics because you've got this possibly more solid granite, or a piece of granite descending like as a slab? We don't know for sure. This is running through very complex software, and we can't know for certain. This could be fracturing, because we know we have a lot of fracturing in the Pacific, just like the hydroplate theory then would propose. Why can't I look at this same data and read that same paper and say, hey, this is evidence for the hydroplate theory? To me, it's not evidence that's valid for catastrophic plate tectonics, because either side could use it.
Just briefly, how far down are we talking?
This one here, I think is 700 kilometers. No, this one actually goes down to a depth of 1,000 kilometers.
Okay.
Yep.
600 miles.
Now, the stuff that the oil and gas do, they don't go down as far because they can't drill as far. But one of the things I asked my cousin too, because he believes in plate tectonics, he went to the School of Mines. And I'm like, well, you know, do you have any evidence of plate tectonics from the work you do in the oil and gas? He goes, well, no, because we would never, it's not going to make us any money. And he's absolutely right. The oil industry isn't going to spend money trying to prove plate tectonics. They want to find oil and gas. Okay, so there's another thing that's used a lot with catastrophic plate tectonics, and that's the modeling. Now, I've seen Baumgartner's, several of his talks. Years ago, he presented this, and you would see a lot of these types of slides. And I guarantee you, I'll say this right now, I'd be shocked if maybe one or two people in that entire auditorium, and at the time there's big classrooms because it was a big conference, maybe one or two people understood what he was talking about, because you know, this model today, it's really difficult to even explain it. But there's huge problems with it. And so Rob Bracken and I, he's the president of Rocky Mountain Christian Fellowship. We've been fortunate that ICC has granted us the right to we're going to work on a paper dealing with modeling and why it should not be used as evidence for catastrophic plate tectonics. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And I feel like I am qualified to speak on it. I led a team at Micron of 8 engineers in the NAND modeling. So we did modeling at Micron. So I do have a background in it, not in a background specifically in, you know, the full wave inversion stuff, but nevertheless. So when you have modeling and you're trying to model the Earth, it's incredibly complex. You've got all kinds of diverse inputs that occur. Your outputs can have a huge range. John Baumgartner came up with a program called Terra to run a lot of differential equation calculations and run a model. It's called a forward model. He later came up with Mabul, a model that he personally developed to try to explain the sediments we see around the globe, and I might touch on that later. But part of my problem with this is, first of all, it's a model, and essentially all models are wrong, and they are. They're guaranteed to be wrong, but is it useful? And the problem with a lot of these models, too, in the geophysics world, they're done by academia. They're not done by companies with a grant or anything else. They're almost all exclusively academia. There's not going to be the rigorous testing and validation. That's one problem. And to me, it's a minor problem, but it nevertheless is a problem. So, to me, it's almost like thinking that Baumgartner has solved a complex problem like this guy on Star Trek with the M5 unit. My team of engineers, there was 8 of us, and they were good engineers, and NAND modeling is far less complex than trying to model the Earth, far less complex. What I've found in my career, typically models can be useful to kind of maybe give an idea if something is plausible, but more often than not, they can be really good at disproving something. There's a model called Mendel's Accountant that Baumgartner was involved with. A great piece of work with John Sanford and Walter Riemeyer. And it does a really good job of showing that evolution can't occur by natural selection, because no matter how favorable of assumption input you put into that model, you can't get evolution. Everything just keeps going downhill. So models can be useful that way, and I will say his model was useful in disproving catastrophic plate tectonics. Well, how can I say that? He had to bring in miracles to save his model. In order for his model to work, he has at least 6 miracles that I'll mention real quickly. This is miracle claim number 1. The physical laws are somehow altered by God to cause plate tectonics and the flood to unfold. He had to inject a miracle into his model by changing the numbers. Edges of the supercontinent get 720 degrees colder, so they sink in the mantle to get catastrophic plate tectonics going. That's miracle claim number 2. Miracle claim number 3, the Earth's mantle somehow got mushier or firmer at that time in order to allow plate tectonics to start. Miracle number 4, God brought a second moon to erode Earth's sediments. So I mentioned earlier, Dr. Baumgartner recognizes the enormous problem of trying to explain mile deep worth of sediment around the globe. How do you get that much sediment from his model? His model says that the oceans already existed, the plates went in, and then the oceans rose and splashed up water all over the continents. How are you going to get that kind of erosion? So he knew he needed an energy source, so he appealed to a second moon to erode their sediments. And that was in an ICC conference, I think, in 2014. He's since backed off on that one. So that one is no longer, he no longer claims that. And as of 2 years ago, I think, in a talk in 2021. Okay. Number 5, God supernaturally accelerated nuclear decay. That's another miracle he has to appeal to. And this one I'll talk to, hopefully if I have time at the end, because I think I have until a little after 1. So hopefully I can get to that one. And then God removed the heat of accelerated radioactive decay. Hydroplate theory doesn't have any of these problems. So when you think of catastrophic plate tectonics, to me, the modeling especially, this is not scientific. You can never peer review a model that uses miracles as its inputs. So I'm going to pile on a little bit more. There's a problem with rising magma. We've discovered that magma, through science, is compressible. So why do I mention compressible? I don't want to bore the tears at you, but I'll explain the concept here. When something's compressible, so let me give you an example. So rubber ducking. You've got a big, instead of your bathtub, you're in a big giant pool. And if you take that rubber ducky, you know, you're in a pool and you put it down, it's going to pop back up, right? Because its density is less than the water around it. So as you push it farther and farther down, it's going to reach a buoyancy equilibrium, where its density, because of the pressure, is equal to the density of the water that was the water's pressure. Then if you push it past what's called the crossover depth, that rubber ducky will sink to the bottom of the pool. It's a well-known physics phenomenon. So that makes sense. That's a serious problem that a lot of secular scientists don't know about, and some proponents of catastrophic plate tectonics. Because what will happen is, at the crossover depth of 220 miles, magma will rise. It's compressible, so it will rise. Anything below 220 miles, boom, it's going to go into the Earth's core. Simple scientific fact.
Is that because it gets compressed?
Yes, and its density increases as you go down into the pressure, so then it's past the point of equilibrium, and since it's compressible, boom, it goes down. This is from the Encyclopedia Britannica, and as you can see that they've got some bad science in there. They've got 2,800 kilometer molten core. Now I did post this to the CRSnet, and they said that not everybody agrees with the convection and this and that. But I did want to mention the fantastic Creation Museum. Has anyone been there? It's awesome. If you haven't, highly recommend it. In fact, our next radio show, we're going to go through a Creation magazine. We love that magazine. We love the museum. But they did have an exhibit there, and I'm going to, just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip this. But that exhibit shows magma coming from thousands of kilometers from the Earth's lower mantle up through and being the fountains of the Great Deep. So unfortunately, catastrophic plate tectonics is really the fountains of great magma. They say that some of it's water, but they believe a lot of it's magma. And if you don't think that's what they think, I mean, here's Creation Magazine. They equate extreme volcanism with the fountains of the Great Deep. So we disagree with that. That's another theological point that we're going to disagree with. I also didn't want to show that presentation at the museum because I've heard somebody went there and was looking for it and couldn't find it, so hopefully they removed it because it's just not scientific. If you want to see it after the talk, let me know and we'll go find that slide. It's about 30 seconds long. And it's a presentation in the museum of this magma coming from way low, way past the crossover depth as the fountains of the Great Deep. Here's what Henry Morris said. And Henry Morris, towards the end of his life, really, we believe he was a supporter of hydroplate theory. He didn't actually come out and say that, but he became very supportive of Walt Brown and really regretted the rift that had occurred. He says this, The Bible specifically attributes the flood to the bursting of the fountains of the great deep and the pouring down of torrential rains from heaven. These two phenomena are sufficient in themselves to explain the flood and all its effects without the necessity of resorting either to supernatural, creative miracles, or to providentially ordered extraterrestrial interferences of a speculative nature. He said this back in 1976, by the way, and I don't think catastrophic plate tectonics have been presented yet. So he's saying even before CPT, don't appeal to miracles because you don't need to. And because he has a PhD in hydraulics, the hydroplate theory likely made a lot of sense to him. That was the impression we got towards the end of his life. So we think, Rich, that should be what should happen here. So, okay. Let's talk about the hydroplate theory. Okay, so, and if you want to know more about it, Rich, he has Walt Brown's book. It's an excellent book. It is very detailed on the hydroplate theory.
Although it's out of print, but you can
Yeah.
go online and look at the 9th edition.
You can. You can go to rsr.org. You can go to hpt.rsr.org or go to creationscience.com, and they've got the entire online book there. And there's a ton of stuff. And I'm only going to touch on the hydroplate theories. Really, to do it justice, you'd have to have at least a 3-hour talk. So I'm only going to go through some of the finer points that I hope I can convey here. So,
Good thing you've got a bright audience.
the brightest audience in the world, if you listen to the radio show. Okay, so the hydroplate does have a starting assumption, and that is this, that there was subterranean water, which is supported, by the way, by numerous conservative scholars for at least for a century. So these are verses that you can hopefully see up there. He's founded it upon the seas. He lays up the deep in storehouses. To him who laid out Raka, which is firmament, the earth above the waters, the earth standing out of water and in the water. On that day, the fountains of the great deep were broken up. Now, most Christians, when they hear the great deep, they're going to think of water. And again, catastrophic plate tectonics says no, it's mostly magma.
Rock is the granite, right?
Yes, the firmament, the crust.
Yeah.
Yes. And we can talk more about that. We believe that there's two firmaments, and the firmament mentioned in Genesis 1:2 is the crust of the earth. Okay, so basically this gives an idea of the initial conditions. The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was moving over the surface of the waters. And the word there is the same word that's used for oceans after the flood. You'll never see that word again until the flood. You'll only see the word for seas. So then on Genesis chapter 1, verse 9 and 10, let the waters below the heavens be gathered into one place and let the dry land appear. God called the dry land earth and gathered the waters, and then he gathered the waters and called them seas. So you've got the subterranean chamber of water and you've got seas above. Okay, then the flood, boom. Genesis 7:11, on the same day all the fountains of the great deep burst open. If you want to listen to a really cool Bible study, get one from Bob Vineyard on the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We believe that's what triggered the flood. Super interesting story. It's actually, there's a description in the Bible of it. If I have time, maybe I'll talk about it later. It's so cool. Okay, so let's look at that passage that talks about the flood now. And the rain was on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. The waters increased. The waters prevailed and greatly increased on the earth. And the waters prevailed exceedingly, and all the high hills were covered. The waters prevailed, and the mountains were covered, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So as you all probably know, it rained 40 days and 40 nights, but then the water kept going up. Now, how does water keep going up if the rain stopped? Well, we believe it's the fountains of the great deep. So consider if you've got a fountain in your, say, a tub or whatever, a swimming pool, you turn this thing on. After 40 days, at some point, the water is going to be high enough where your fountain isn't going to keep spraying up. But it's still running, so you're going to continue to increase in water, just like it says in Genesis. The water increased, and this is after the 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, Now we have the mid-oceanic ridge. We mentioned this earlier where plate tectonics, they see these ridges in the oceans and they say, well, you got seafloor spreading this way and that way. It's interesting, a lot of people don't know that the Earth has a big crack going all the way around it. And we believe it makes a ton of sense that was the fountains of the Great Deep. It's like a baseball. The seam on a baseball, this crack goes all the way around the Earth. It would probably, we estimate, take about 3 hours for that crack to go completely around the Earth at the speed of sound. So that was the breaking up of the fountains of the Great Deep. This is another demonstration by Brian Nickel where he shows how as the hydroplates start sliding, at about day 150, the plates start crashing, and then they meet resistance. So if you look at where all the mountain ranges form, they line up with the mid-oceanic ridge, the mid-Atlantic ridge. So that's where you get all your mountain ranges, the majority of them. And then you look at these mountains in British Columbia. That's pretty good evidence of rapid compression. I mean, that rock has to be soft when this happens. This doesn't happen over millions of years. Okay, the relation of mountains to plateaus. If you think about, like, these huge plateaus all over the Earth, you know, there's the Tibet Plateau, the Columbian Plateau. They're all right next to these big mountain ranges. And currently, the hydroplate theory is the only one I'm aware of that can explain this mystery. Now, secular scientists don't know, they can't explain them. These are what secular scientists say. The problem of the uplift of large plateau areas is one which has puzzled students of the Earth's crust for a very long time. What mechanism would cause a large volume of low-standing continents to rise rapidly a mile in the air? Well, we already kind of got a clue that the hydroplate theory is that mechanism. And then furthermore, evidence from gravity surveys suggests that the rocks underlying the Colorado Plateau are in isostatic balance. That is, the large area is floating at its correct elevation in view of its mass and density. It's done moving. Recent seismic evidence confirms this in that the depth to the discontinuity, the MOHO, which separates the Earth's crust with the mantle, under the Colorado Plateau is approximately 10 kilometers greater than over most of continental North America. It's floating in its correct elevation. We have then a double-ended mystery. Well, let's see what the hydroplate theory says. So, the mountains, when they formed, after this compression event, when the hydroplate slid, crashed, boom, the mountains started sinking because this whole event's kind of at its end, and so now it's going to sink a little bit. And then with both hydraulic lifting and gravity, we have a mechanism that's going to cause the plateaus to rise. So now we're going to jump into the woolly mammoths. I'll try to go quickly through this. One foot's on a bison, another one's on a reindeer. These guys, great fossil evidence, and you know how quickly they formed. But let's take a look at the woolly mammoths. Cause of death, suffocation. That's pretty good evidence for that. A lot of people agree with that. They have well-preserved food in their stomach and mouth. Some are not native to Siberia. Time of death, late summer. The meat was actually edible. When they discovered these things, the dogs would eat some of the leftover, the meat, and they didn't get sick. I probably would have, but the meat was still, it wasn't like decaying. And then unruptured tissue cells. Extreme freezing in summer. Now, how could that be? Was it really a cold weather mammoth? So let's look at fiction versus fact. Lived in a cold Arctic climate. That's fiction. Fact is, the DNA shows it's related to the Indian elephant, and elephants live in the tropics. We're going to find out how woolly and what happened here in a second. Fat layer warmth. That's fiction. I've been told that same thing about when I owned Alaskan Malamutes. I got an email from a neighbor. Oh, your dog's out and it's 20 degrees. I'm like, please Google Malamutes and you'll find out they can survive at minus 30. So he's pretty good. And by the way, that coat he has on and that thick hair, that protects him more, as much or more in the summer as it does in the winter. Anyways, sorry, that's kind of an aside on my Malamutes. I should add a picture to the slide. Okay. So what's an assumption when you say the wool coat is for insulation? It's just hair. The tusks, fiction, they're used to move snow to eat tundra food. You know, these things require a lot of food a day, man. They'd have to be really strong to be foraging around to get their food. So we have tons of evidence that something happened. It rapidly froze them. So in Siberia, in 1942, they found, during a road construction, they found these fish that were frozen in this river. Okay, more evidence. In Tibet, they found wild oxen. There's more than 50 of them encrusted in the ice. So they're heading through this lake and then a river, and they get frozen suddenly. How does that happen? How can something get frozen that quick? Well, the hydroplate theory actually has an answer. So again, let's real quickly look at some of the fossils that we find up in the Arctic region. You find all of these guys. So you've got even badgers and shrews, you know, things that live in warm areas. Cold-blooded animals, you find them in the Arctic as fossils. You even find huge redwood trees. Up in the Arctic, we found redwood fossils. They're not there now, obviously. They couldn't survive there. So how did it get cold so fast during late summer, a cold hail? If poles were warm, what happened? How did planets get sunlight? How did it stay cold? So as the fountains of the great deep are going, bursting forth, you have a lot of that stuff achieve escape velocity from the planet, but a lot of it didn't. It's going to come down as cold hail because outer space is really cold. So we're going to answer this question here. I find it really interesting. It's called the Big Roll, and there's scientific evidence for this. So if you consider the Earth, according to the hydroplate theory, before the Great Flood, the mass of the Earth's surface was pretty evenly distributed. So with the formation of the Himalayas, you had a mass disturbance, a shift. So if you consider any spinning object, there's a centrifugal force acting upon, the mass of each piece of mass. So here's, let's say the Himalayas up here. This force, when it's spinning, it's going to alter the object. It's going to roll the object. It's going to roll to that point of weight. So here was Mammothville before the flood, and then you had a fairly rapid rolling because of this weight shift that happened soon after the compression event when the Himalayas popped up. And so now Mammothville is now near the Arctic, and that's what we believe happened. And I'm not going through all the technical and scientific evidence for this, but you can read about it in both Walt Brown's book, or you can go to Brian Nickel has videos on this on YouTube. Here's secular scientific evidence for it. And this involves Steens Mountain, where they noticed that they had evidence of rapid magnetic pole changes recorded in ancient lava flows up to 6% per day for several days.
6 degrees.
Oh, I'm sorry, what did I say? I'm sorry, 6 degrees per day. Thank you very much. So now the secular scientists will say, well, that was a magnetic reversal. Maybe that mountain did move. That would explain it too. So that's evidence for this roll. Now here's another aspect of the hydroplate theory I think is super cool. It also explains why we have a 365-year day. And that's kind of a challenge for us in engineering. It's an annoyance. It's not a challenge as much as an annoyance having to deal with leap years and leap seconds even. So there's something called the conservation of angular momentum. So we're going to get to slides where a lot of the Earth's mass, we believe, about 5% roughly, left the Earth in the fountains of great deep, because there's lots of erosion going on and rocks and stuff spewing out, and that's what Rob Brown's going to get into in even more detail in 2 months. Well, what happens when something loses mass? Well, there's a conservation of angular momentum. So imagine a skater with their arms out. So this physics principle says that as they bring in everything closer, they're going to spin faster. So as weight decreased on the Earth, it would have spun faster. So interestingly, most of the world's cultures have a tradition of a literal 30 days in a month. And if you think of God and His perfection, and He said that He created the stars and the moon for signs and seasons, would He really have it where you have a month that's one month's 31 days, one's 30, and you got to throw in February that has 28, and every now and then you got to throw in that leap day and make it 29 days. They had to somehow get 365 days. And you can go back and read a lot of stuff in these cultures where they were just confused and they always tried to solve this whole problem. The year should be 360 days, but it wasn't. Well, something changed that. And we believe it was a mass that left the Earth because it wouldn't explain it scientifically. So if you look at the fact that if the days are 20 minutes longer, here's pre-flood, just to give you an example, and then you see post-flood on the right. And because of the conservation of angular momentum, you kind of see the effect that before the flood, everything was on a perfect 30-day month. Which had a longer day, same year. So I think it's a really good explanation of why we have a 365-day year. God created the world perfectly. Everything would have been 30 days. The lunar month would have been a lunar 30 days. We would have a perfect 360-day year. Okay, let's look at the fountains of the great deep. And comets, asteroids, meteors, and interstellar dust. And this is, again, you'll hear better stuff on this, better details from Dr. Ralph Brown. Consider that comets have all these elements in them. Water, salts, limestone, and clay. Crystalline silicates. Cubonite. And this only forms, by the way, in scalding hot water between 122 and like 400 degrees Fahrenheit. So how does that happen in something that's in space that's icy cold? Where did that happen? Olivine, iron, nickel. If you're a geologist, you know that olivine is found all over the Earth's crust. And by the way, iron nickel the formation requires at least 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Where's the energy and the heat to create this? It makes a lot of sense if they came from the Earth's surface, beneath the crust of the Earth. Makes a ton of sense. You even find organics, amino acids, bacteria.
As scientists
let's see,
in a clean laboratory, what they discovered inside stunned them all. The meteorites contained solid crystals and liquid water.
This demonstrates the enormous power of subterranean supercritical water that mountains of the great deep that launch water and rock fragments into orbits around the sun. These rock fragments are still returning to the Earth as meteorites. Meteorites contain Earth-like material, including many types of living but dormant bacteria. This means that meteorites and their bacteria didn't originate in the vacuum of space. Meteorites are literally tiny chunks of the Earth itself returning home.
Scientists are also scratching their heads over another recent discovery. On the Kola Peninsula in northern Russia, they have created the world's deepest hole, extending to a depth of 7.5 miles. At this depth, what they expected to find was a layer of basalt, Earth's most common type of volcanic rock. What they actually discovered was something entirely different.
The hole didn't reach the basalt underlying the granite continents, but to everyone's surprise, they did reach hot, salty water flowing through crushed granite. Geologists are mystified, but the hydroplate theory provides a simple explanation.
Did the springs of the great deep burst forth and flood the entire Earth, just as the Bible says? Dr. Brown's hydroplate theory offers us a plausible scientific explanation for how this may have happened. The hydroplate theory, which supports the story of Noah's flood, says it was the latter. If that is true, what better example of supernatural engineering could one ask for?
Okay, by the way, that was You'll be shocked to hear this, but that was 60 minutes. And there's no way they'd allow that now. Yeah, that was a clip from 60 Minutes. Okay. So, other examples. Interstellar dust. It closely matches signatures produced by cellulose and dried frozen bacteria. How could large, complex molecules form or survive in space? This is from two evolutionists. I'm not quoting Dr. Brown here. They found sea plankton on the International Space Station. The Russians did. Now, NASA denies it, and they say, well, we don't believe it. And that's okay, because they didn't actually collect it and bring it home. But the Russian scientists, they really didn't have a reason to lie about it. Dr. Carter, Rob Carter, objects to this evidence because he doesn't see how those molecules could survive in space. But to me, this is still evidence because you have to explain how it cannot survive in space. So, anyways, it's there. It's a bit of evidence. Here's one of my favorites. And before we talk about an Earth rock on the moon, if you look at the near side and far side, a lot of people don't realize that the near side is pockmarked, a lot heavier. It's like you took a shotgun to it, just blasted it. The far side has craters that are a lot smaller, which would make sense if it got pummeled from the front, the fountains of great deep, and then some of those rocks are going to hit it and fly off, and then be caught in the gravity of the moon and land on the other side. So you're going to get some splattering on the other side, but you're going to have a huge amount of damage on the front side. I mean, it's exactly what you see. Now, do we think God created a moon like that? No, it makes a lot of sense that the fountains of the great deep, judgment, the flood, caused this. And there's evidence like it's the colder far side really surprised evolutionists. I'm going to go ahead and skip these. I want to get to what was really cool. So finding an Earth rock on the moon. So Alan Shepard found a rock back in, I don't have the note here, but I think it was
Like 50 years ago.
it was at least, like, I want to say 76, but I'm not sure
They
that.
celebrated the 50th year that they had said
Okay.
about it.
Yeah.
All of a sudden,
Because they knew about it for a long time, they didn't announce it until 2019.
right.
So what is an Earth rock doing on the moon? Now, unless Alan Shepard is the luckiest guy in the world and he won the Earth rock lottery, that means there's a lot more Earth rocks on the moon. One of the rocks he happens to pick up happens to be maybe one lucky rock that got there from Earth. We know it wasn't a rock caught in his shoe because this Earth rock is embedded in a moon rock. So, to me, that's pretty powerful evidence. How did that Earth rock get there? Hydroplate theory clearly explains that. No other flood model does.
Fred,
Yep.
can you explain how they made that determination, composition, or whatever it was?
Next slide. This is right from the website, the NASA website. The results, Crane says, indicate that the rock formed in a water-rich environment. Interesting. At temperatures and pressures corresponding to either 19 kilometers beneath the surface of the Earth. Interesting. I can't make this stuff up. It's fun presenting the hydroplate theory. Or about 170 kilometers deep in the moon, but they don't believe that. This geodynamicist at Macquarie University in Sydney favors an Earth origin because a depth of 170 kilometers would be crazy, way below the moon's crust where granitic rocks could have formed. Now that's not providing specific details, but you can look it up and the evidence of why they, the materials that are in this rock and why they believe that this rock came from the Earth. But it's interesting that the NASA scientists who we think work for Walt Brown, they say it came from a water-rich environment about 10 miles, 12 miles beneath the surface of the Earth, which is well within the... Walt Brown originally estimated 10 miles for the subterranean chamber, but later that was changed to 60, and part of that was because of the massive rocks we see in space that, again, Rob Brown will talk about. It adds up to about 5% of Earth's mass, so if you do that calculation, then you probably need to be a little bit deeper for the subterranean waters. Okay, so we have this little slide we do on Science Radio while Brown was here. Okay, now this is interesting. If you consider what the hydroplate theory says, is that at the rupture of the Atlantic side, there was isotropic rebound, and so the Pacific side of the Earth would sink. So John Baumgartner, again, great guy, he's a catastrophic plate tectonics guy, so he objected to Walt Brown predicting that you would find crust in the Pacific, because that's what his theory requires, based on what he knows of physics. So John Baumgartner said this: regarding the hydroplate theory's claim that a layer of buoyant granitic crust currently lies beneath the Pacific Basin, such continental crust is readily distinguished from mantle rock by modern seismic techniques, yet there's an unmistakable absence of any thick layer of granitic crust in the Pacific Basin. And he said this in 2012. Well, as we reported on the radio in 2017-18 timeframe, when they discovered the hidden continent of Zealandia, it's a new continent. They consider it a continent in science. It's underneath, most of it's underwater, but they found crust in the Pacific. They've been finding crust in the Pacific a lot longer than even when we discovered this. So, Zealandia on the Pacific side of the Earth. There's other places that they've found, when they've drilled or they've done experiments, they've found crust. Here's what Christian Smoot said. Much of the Pacific Ocean floor is underlain by continental crust, so much so that the Russians have developed an idea they call oceanization, where the entire Earth is all continental and the floors in the ocean basins are being converted to basalt by technothermal, magmatic, and drifting processes. Christian Smoot doesn't know it, but he works for Walt Brown also. I mean, this fits perfectly with the hydroplate theory. Texas Tech Geosciences Department, there's been denial of these findings. This is what they said: we were surprised and concerned for the objectivity and honesty of science that such data can be overlooked or ignored. And he's referring to finding crust that doesn't fit plate tectonics in the Pacific Ocean. So there's our sign again. So now, what about the Atlantic side? The prediction was missing crust on the Atlantic. Guess what happened in 2007? Earth's crust missing in the mid-Atlantic, reported by Science News. And of course, on the radio, we jumped all over that. So it becomes the floor of the Atlantic. Missing crust in the Atlantic, and they must, as a listener wrote to Bob, they must have been reading Walt Brown. It was really cool, another confirmation. This is what a secular scientist said: the discovery is like an open wound on the surface of the Earth. Was the crust never there? Was it once there but then torn away huge geological faults? If so, then how and why? This is after Walt Brown predicted they would find this. The hard currency of science is predictions, and hydroplate theory has a lot of them that have been validated. There's other ones that are waiting to be validated. I challenge anyone, I've seen one prediction of catastrophic plate tectonics, but to me it's not compelling that they predicted they'd find cold slabs, but they're relying on models, and we don't really know that that slab is cold and how cold it is. So that's the only one I know of catastrophic plate tectonics for a prediction. So the mantle is exposed here. Okay, so in the Pacific, it's fractured. We've got overwhelming evidence for this. It's fractured everywhere. And this is pretty good evidence. That something really drastic happened. This thing's subducted. Now, I think Michael Ord and I know Phil Budd, there's others that have a subducting Pacific model based on this evidence. They're not supporters of hydroplate theory, though we're working on Michael Ord. I think Rob made some progress there. Anyways, so there's really good, this is overwhelming evidence. I don't think anyone really disputes that, this fracturing. And so along the edge of the Pacific, there's something called the Ring of Fire. So the Pacific is really unlike the Atlantic. There's all these, let me do the next. So this is the Ring of Fire right here. Within this ring, we've got concentration restrictions, 40,000 volcanoes, and all these large volcanoes or earthquakes. So there's very volatile area. It's on the ring around the Pacific where we believe it subducted. Okay, this is the spot where I have to hit hey, maybe that thing will stop. So last time I gave this talk, that thing just kept going. Nope, see, it's going to...
I turned it down.
We'll have to do the escape and then back into here. Oops. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, in this part of the Pacific, you've got 40,000 seamounts. Those are basically buried volcanoes, and a lot of them are still active. You still have magma pouring out on the Pacific floor. Continues to spill out there. And here's an example Walt Brown gave of how it kind of is like pushing in on a ping pong ball, how you have this depression that occurred on the Pacific side. So again, we got to get our Walt Brown sign out here. Ring of fire, 40,000 volcanoes, trench concentration in an Arctic cusp outline. Already talked about how plate tectonics doesn't explain Arctic cusps. Okay, so we mentioned the asteroids and flying, the stuff that got shot up into space by the fountains of the Great Deep. Now, some of the objections to that idea of achieving escape velocity, one of them was, well, first of all, even if that can occur, and by the way, the creation scientists who were trying to say that it couldn't achieve escape velocity, I'm sorry, they're not credentialed to do so. And Walt Brown is, and so are other creationists that agree that that can happen. But you have some that say, well, you know, I did a calculation and it can't happen. Well, it can. And they also say that you have a heat problem. So you have a heat problem with all this, the fountains of the Great Deep, which was supercritical water, and super hot, shooting up to the fountains of the Great Deep. And so the guy who came up with this theory from MIT, his PhD in mechanical engineering, you know what his thesis was on? Heat transfer. So he's pretty qualified to speak on it. And one of the things, heat will dissipate as it goes up, as it expands out. You can confirm this with by yourself. You can blow on your hand, it's hot. Blow on your hand with your hand farther out. Feel free to try it at your own leisure. It's cooler. Hot, cooler. That's one of the concepts, among others, for the heat transfer. There's absolutely no heat problem. Okay, so prediction number 28 in this book, these are all right before they were realized. And I realize I'm almost out of time, so we'll try to run through these because you'll hear more about these from Dr. Rob Brown. Can't wait for that. He predicted that asteroids with rock piles, often with ice acting as weak glue deep inside. And that's because with the fountains of Great Deep, all these rocks coming out, the gravity will hold them together. And that's exactly what we found. So, nature reported that Ceres is a partially differentiated body with a rocky core. That was predicted by Walt Brown, and there's the sign again. Okay, then you've got, if you think about how pebbles in a stream, transport of pebbles in a stream causes them to collide and rub against one another in a stream bed, and the resulting abrasion produces the familiar smooth and rounded shape of river rocks. So Walt Brown predicted you'd find rounded rocks on like comets and asteroids, and that's exactly what you found. And NASA scientists were baffled, and they did not understand it. But that's exactly what you find. And I know that Rob will be covering this a little bit more detail. It was a shock. They did not understand. They did not expect to find rounded boulders on these. I'm going to skip that animation. Real quick, this is a NASA astronaut who took Walt Brown's book up into space. Okay, he didn't take that book. That thing was too heavy for their payload, but he did take his CD. And this is shuttle pilot James Dutton. He tracked Walt Brown down later and found the sign of his hydroplate. So here's a NASA scientist that agreed with the hydroplate theory. These are things that are, how do you explain two objects the size of skyscrapers, how they could collide without blowing each other to smithereens? That's NASA saying. How could that happen? Well, it can happen if those rocks were already gravitationally bound as they left the Earth. And I'm pretty sure that Rob will touch on that. So, let's see, I'm just going to skip through here. Everybody remembers the predictions of Pluto. They thought it would be a dead, dry planet, and it was alive. And One report said Pluto may be made from 1 billion comets. Interesting. So again, Dr. Rob Brown, wait for 2 months, you get more details on that. Finally, you give me 5 minutes, I'll talk about the origin of Earth's radioactivity. If you consider, if you look at all the examples throughout history of people reporting seeing lights linked to earthquakes, like lightning and bright lights, scientists were skeptical for, I don't know, I'd say decades, if not a century. Well, eventually, scientists came on board, and this was a true phenomenon. You get these earthquake lights. And Walt Brown, in his book, gives a really good description and idea of how the hydroplate theory explains all these earthquake lights, and also the origin of radioactivity. So in compressing quartz, it generates a voltage. So what would happen in the hydroplate theory? You're going to compress quartz. But the way that you had the tidal pumping, you had the breaking the fountains of great deep, and you had like hammers, these things are fluttering. The hydroplates are fluttering, and you're going to generate lots of electricity. And so if you look, there's a lot of science behind this that I'm going to skip through. Lightning bolts create radioactivity, scientists discover. They create radioactivity. Walt Brown's hydroplate theory comes up with the origin of the Earth's radioactivity. No other creation scientist model does that. In fact, Dr. Baumgartner believes that the moon wasn't created on day 4 at the last ICC conference, and to Danny Faulkner's credit, he challenged him on that. And it's because he can't explain the radioactivity on the moon. I don't know if him and the guy from Mississippi State had backed off on that. Him and another guy proposed that the moon was created on day 1. That's not good. But I'm not making that up, that happened. And part of it is he can't explain radioactivity. Walt Brown's theory can. The radioactivity on the moon would have been the rocks that landed there. God wouldn't create radioactivity in a perfect world, because radioactivity is harmful. It destroys, it enters your body and destroys your cells slowly over time. So radioactivity is the result of man's judgment in the flood. And that's what the hydroplate theory shows. The origin of radioactivity is when the hydroplates, when that compression event occurred. So as we mentioned, here's Walt Brown's book. You can go to the rsr.org/store, and you can get Bob's video on this. He has more details, like on the geology side and other things that you won't get in this talk. It's a 3 CD video. It's excellent. My favorite video in the store is the Big Bang, Evidence Against the Big Bang. That's fantastic. So if you want to support our radio show, that's the best way to do it. It's just to go to rsr.org/store. This month is actually our telethon month too, so we're trying to raise money to stay on the air, because with a radio show, as a conservative biblical radio show, we have to pay for airtime. We're not Rush Limbaugh, we get paid to be on the air, so that's one way to support us. And again, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. I'd love to announce, I'm very pleased to announce that Doug McBurney has joined me as the official co-host of Real Science Radio. If you've heard the show, Doug is excellent. He's been doing radio a lot longer than me, and he's just great. I'm so thrilled that he's willing to be the co-host. So that's it. I hope I wasn't too fast at the end and too much,
Take about a 5 to 7 minute break. We'll come back for Q&A. Hopefully we have a lot. Okay? Let's take a break first.
With this topic, there normally is a lot.
Speed travel.
Oh, thank you.
Straight instead of it's a good question.
And your name is Mark. I don't do the video, but I yeah, the treasure. Yeah. No, I was a CPA. And
Feels like the floor is
I just give me your, you know, I hate these little dead fish. Yeah, you're up right now, so but you have to get them around. Yes. And at our age, somebody might stand up quickly and if they fall over, how is that? It's fine. What you said is and is this from the mission? Okay. Okay, it will be. Okay. And that was find a book so I can find it. Okay. Yeah.
creation ensure more
Am I up? Okay. Let's go ahead and let's grab our seats and we'll get ready for the Q&A. So I'm going to go ahead and start out with a question, and then again we'll take questions from everyone in the audience. So in the book, it's under figure 52, edition 8. It shows a separation of the North and South America, Europe and Africa and so forth via the oceanic ridge. So they're not together. So it would suggest that Walt does not hold to the Pangea viewpoint that is proposed typically. But the question really relates more to the transcontinental sediments that occur. And there have been sediments that clearly show they cover, say, Midwest U.S., Kansas, and so forth, all the way past to England, even into the Mideast, and they're continuous. So the question, I guess, would be, is that if that's true about not having the continents together before the flood, fully together before the flood, sort of the Pangea idea that a lot of creation scientists do, how would you answer the continuous nature of the transcontinental sediments? Say, for instance, the chalk sediments that make up the cliffs of Dover show up in Kansas, they show up in the Mideast. What would be the explanation if that mid-oceanic ridge has been there sort of since the beginning of creation, which may be the case?
Okay, so Pangea. So one of the things with catastrophic plate tectonics, they like the fact that the creationists came up with Pangea. That's true. Christian came up with the idea of Pangea. And then plate tectonics, later on, they came around and said, yeah, because they disputed that for a long time. And they agreed that there was one continent, one mass of continental crust around the Earth. And then Pangea split up into plates over millions and millions and millions of years. So catastrophic plate tectonics believes in that same Pangea, but that it happened the plate movements happened rapidly. It's a really, to me, there's a serious problem with catastrophic plate tectonics. I'll explain that and I'll get why hydroplate theory works much better. If you look at Pangea and you try to separate it out, because the idea is that the continents fit like a jigsaw puzzle, right? They don't. That's wrong. You can go look at it. They do not fit like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to lose 35% of Africa's square footage. You have to add square footage in different parts of America. They do not fit. It kind of looks like maybe just, kind of they might fit, but they don't. Now the hydroplate theory. Walt Brown and us proponents of the hydroplate theory, we agree that there was a Pangea. So everybody's on board with the Pangea. One crust around the Earth. Hydroplate theory doesn't think there were oceans, there were seas. Catastrophic plate tectonics thinks there were a whole bunch of oceans. We think that there's a lot of continental crust and you have different seas here and there. We don't know from the Bible how many seas we had. But I think from the Bible we have a pretty good clue that we didn't have oceans after, when God brought up the crust of the earth, because from that point on until after the flood, you don't see the word for oceans again. So, why does the hydroplate theory explain that better? The mid-oceanic ridge, if you look at the globe and if you look at that slide, let me just go ahead and find it really quickly. So this is, again, there's so many things you can talk about the hydroplate theory, and I left out the Pangea stuff because you kind of got to pick and choose what you're going to talk about. So let's go here, for example, and pull that one up. Why the hydroplate theory is a better explanation is, what did I do with the, whoops, it's right here. So if you try to make these fit like a jigsaw puzzle again, you have to get rid of 35% of Africa. And you have to do a bunch of finagling around here with the Americas. It doesn't fit. But what does fit, sorry about that, I got a microphone here. Can you hear me now? Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. What does fit, these line up pretty well. The continents here, those do fit. The continents coming up against the mid-oceanic ridge, that's a much better fit. So Pangea was one continent, but everything split from here and slid in opposite directions. Does that make sense? If you believe in Pangea and the plate tectonics, you can't bring this over here and have those fit. And there's pictures in his book where he shows that. He tries to show how it really doesn't fit well.
But how would the continuous nature of those?
Yeah, and that's excellent work by Tom Clary on all the mega sequences. Absolutely good work. So, fountains of the Great Deep, when this thing is exploding and these plates are sliding, you've got, where do the sediments come from according to the hydroplate theory?
Well, I mean, for the chalk, that's really from the ocean material, and that's limestone.
Not what the hydroplate theory says. Catastrophic plate tectonics and plate tectonics, they have a huge, huge, huge problem explaining limestone. Like I said, the hydroplate theory, I could go on for another couple hours on it. Read the section on the formation of limestone. The hydroplate theory has the best explanation. Limestone is hard to make. How do you make that kind of, and if you try to make that thing with modern day processes, no life would survive on planet Earth because of the chemistry involved. But the chemistry involved, there's a really plausible explanation, and it said, you can see, go to Brian Nichol, look up Brian Nichol, and read and watch one of his videos on limestone formation. He has an entire video on it, 30 minutes long. And that the limestone formation comes from beneath the Earth's surface. All that sediments that are being pushed up through the fountains of the Great Deep, an enormous amount of sediments. Again, plate tectonics, catastrophic plate tectonics cannot explain the sediments. Baumgartner is now trying to do so with a model that relies on miracles. They think the ocean was already there, so how's an ocean going to constantly splash around and sediments just kind of remain stationary until you get enough where you can bury a mile worth of sediments around the globe? Those mega sequences, Tom Clary's, are easily explained by the tons of sediments that happen here. And in his book, he goes he has 6 layers of mega sequences, and all of those make sense they all correspond to things that could easily be subterranean. So they get buried. They wouldn't pick one side of the globe, but this enormous amount of sediments coming up. And at the same time, you've got, it was day 150 when the hydroplate theory theorized that the plates crashed. But in the meantime, you do have a huge amount of sediments on either side of the mid-Atlantic ridge, right here, forming before those plates start to slide. Then they slide, and then either side has those mega sequences and oil well data that Clary rightly points to when he says that, hey, both you've got oil data here that matches oil data here. Well, that's not evidence for plate tectonics anymore. It's equal evidence to hydroplate theory. They both explain that. Does that make sense? Okay. Yes?
I don't have the mic, but I was wondering if you could explain how the water, below the granite got hot and how the cracks started?
Yeah, so according to the hydroplate theory, and I'll say there's a little bit of discussion around this because some say that, well, God then had a ticking time bomb,
Right.
with man's fall from creation. Walt Brown proposes because of the moon, there's a tidal pumping effect. The moon's effect of gravity on the earth, we have tides and whatnot. And that you have this motion underneath tidal pumping of these crusts. And you have these pillars that are mentioned in the Bible. And so supercritical water over time, and Walt Brown explains how supercritical water can form, but with this tidal pumping, this constant pressure up and down, that at some point you start to get the supercritical water working through cracks and whatnot, and at some point the flood triggered. And that's where you get into, you can get into theology like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, that God said is sent down into hell with the depths of man, and the tree of life is, in the new heavens. It's a great Bible study. I'd love to talk more about that. But something released that pressure with all this tidal pumping. At some point, let's say there was somehow that thing was keeping the water, the pressure. It was like you take it off in the pressure cork and then everything blows with that tree. I'm going to tell you right now, there's a Bible. I don't like to use the word story, but story is applicable where you really mean a true story. The Bible mentions an account of a great tree that was so great, he was huge. And its branches overlooked, nations lived under it, and its branches were as high as the mountains next to it. And evil men came and cut that tree down. And if you do a Bible study on the tree of knowledge of evil, good and evil, you'll see it's a synonym also to the law. God loves symbolism. Men went and cut that tree down. It was thrown into hell. And we believe, speculatively, that was the trigger of the Great Flood. Get Bob Inyard's Tree of the Knowledge of Good and Evil at rsr.org/store. That passage is in the Bible. The thing I just explained is not something I made up. When I heard it in that Bible study, before I was given the punchline, I read up all of Genesis and I couldn't find it, and I thought, Bob's crazy. The answer's in Ezekiel. It's actually explained there. Just like when God explained Satan, and he compared him to the king of Tyre. And Tyre said, hey, Tyre, you're like this, you're like Satan. Oh, by the way, Satan was like this. King of Egypt, you're like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Oh, by the way, this is what happened to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. So I'm kind of babbling, but you had this tidal pumping going on, and then when that crack broke, and you had enough pressure, whatever triggered the flood, however you want to speculate that, then that's when the force of that water, everything exploded up and reached escape velocity, and you had these water hammers with the way these plates were fluttering, and then over time, that supercritical water, which is highly, the viscosity of it is enormous. You could slide like butter on that supercritical water once the Earth reached that point where the Atlantic crust is lifting up, and then the plates start sliding. So I hope that answered it.
Well, I think people don't realize what critical water to energy is.
Yeah.
Like we had I think it says there's half the ocean was below the earth before the eruption. Is that right?
Yeah, below the crust of the ocean.
You don't realize a thermos of this critical water is like a piece of dynamite.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah,
How
it's
much
very.
energy that is if you had half an ocean filled with this water.
Yes.
Energy would be so
Yes.
huge out.
And the book explains how you get to the state of supercritical water, which is something that is real that scientists, talk about.
What is critical water?
It's what's supercritical water? It's supercritical.
It's like 800 degrees C.
I don't have slides on that. And it would be difficult for me to explain that in a short period of time, so I'm going to leave that as a lesson to look it up on Google.
I think
That's
it's 800 degrees C.
Is that what it is?
Pressurized water
Yeah.
at 800 degrees C.
That's
So like I said, this is like a stick of dynamite
yeah.
for critical water.
Yeah, you're going to have enormous amounts of pressure in subterranean waters. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, wow. Go ahead.
Yeah, here in town we have Garden of Gods, and that Was that formed when the crust met resistance and then lifted up? Was it lifted up with the mountains, or did that happen after, maybe in the hydraulic lift to the Colorado Plateau?
Yes. So, honest answer.
Repeat the question.
Oh, okay. Repeat the question. The Garden of Gods.
Garden of God, what caused that formation? Was that,
Yeah.
did that occur with when the crust slid and met resistance, and were they raised with Rocky Mountains? Or did that happen possibly during the Colorado Plateau uplift?
Sorry about the mic situation. Okay, thank you. So my answer to that question is, I have no idea. And the reason I say that is because I'm not a geologist, but I'm going to I can speculate and say that was part of the fountains, or part of the compression event, and then the subsequent lifting behind it. But that's where I'm just not a geologist, and I'd rather appeal to a geologist who can give a better answer than me. And his answer isn't necessarily going to support or deny either hydroplate theory or catastrophic. That's just it's a good question. I just don't know. Garden of Gods is, it's an awesome beauty, but maybe that could have already been there.
We know that there's a huge shift, a huge break in the crust right there.
Oh, we do. Okay.
I mean, it went in the Denver Basin area, it went way down and then just lifted up. So
Okay.
it was behind it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think you
Got people to count. Yeah.
My question is,
Okay. You're going to look at Aspens?
you described the fountain to the great deep breaking up,
Okay.
high
Have
pressure
fun.
water coming out, and causing massive erosion. It reached an escape velocity, which is somewhere around 25,000 miles an hour. Has anybody done an analysis that says, since it has no continuing energy output, like an airplane, for example, to accelerate as it's going through the atmosphere, which they say a thing is thicker back before the flood than after the flood, how fast did that water and the erosion and the rocks having to be traveling as they left the Earth's surface and went through the atmosphere in order to still be at escape velocity in order to make it to the moon or the asteroid?
Yes. So Walt Brown has it in his book. He has like a layman section and he has a technical section. So he has a complete technical section explaining, how the subterranean water in the fountains of Great Deep achieved escape velocity and how fast they had to go. And realize again, Walt Brown taught this. He taught rocket science, so he knows about escape velocity. And he knows the energy it takes to maintain it and make that happen. I'm not a rocket scientist, so I won't give you technical details because I can't. But it is in Walt Brown's book.
2 months away, we can ask that question again when Rob is here.
Yes.
Rob Brown. He'll be able to answer that question.
Exactly. He'll be the subject matter expert on that one.
Yeah.
If I were a beginning geology student today, would I get plate tectonics or would I get hydroplate?
You'll get plate tectonics for sure in the secular schools. And the Christian schools, it depends, because the major creation organizations like AIG and Creation Ministries International, they support the catastrophic plate tectonics. But that's kind of an old guard, and we'll see what happens over time. Again, we touched on why there was that rift and why that's happening. We obviously don't agree with them, and we know a lot of the rank and file creationists don't agree with catastrophic plate tectonics, but that could be taught in Christian schools. But they taught the vapor canopy in Christian schools for years, and that's why we think it's important. If it's wrong, we want to know if hydroplate theory is wrong and if catastrophic plate tectonics is wrong. We don't want people to have this misinformation, for how many ever years before someone realizes it's wrong. I mean, I don't want to, this is just my opinion. There could be things about the hydroplate theory that's wrong, maybe the whole thing's wrong, but in my own personal mind as an engineer and looking at all the data, the odds of catastrophic plate tectonics being correct to me is less than 0.5%. I see no chance for that being true because unless you really believe those that God would do all those miracles to make that happen. It would be mind-boggling to me that one person stumbled onto something, and again, he's appealing to a secular model to start with. The hydroplate theory does a lot better job of starting with Scripture in the Bible, talking about subterranean waters reserved for judgment, by the way. There's other passages, they're all in Walt Brown's book. There's a lot of passages that support biblically the idea of subterranean water and being for judgment, and just the hydroplate in general. I think there's a hand over here. Yeah.
Is it correct to simplify the whole thing and say that catastrophic plate tectonics is based on magma and hydroplate theory is based on water?
I think that might be an oversimplification, because I wouldn't want to, I think even Tim Clary tries to get more water into the magma, but others don't. And Answers in Genesis had a slide on their museum clearly showing magma coming up from basically beneath the mantle practically. And hopefully they've corrected that, because it's scientifically only possible with a miracle. Maybe that's why if they kept it, that's why. But that would be kind of an oversimplification in my mind. Catastrophic plate tectonics relies on a secular idea of plate tectonics sped up rapidly. That was John Baumgartner's original goal, he said, was to get plate tectonics into the Bible because he was convinced it was true.
On his point, do you know of any Christian colleges teaching HPT?
Oh, good question. No, I don't. I don't know of one. That doesn't mean that there isn't one. So, Liberty would be one that maybe, Liberty University, I just don't know. Because the big organizations support catastrophic mostly right now, there's definitely critics within even their upper echelons, but the problem is you just have a handful of guys, but they have a lot of influence. Tim Clary's like the lead scientist at ICR. You've got Andrew Snelling. He's a lead scientist at Answers in Genesis. Danny Faulkner, he's an astronomer, but he doesn't like the hydroplate theory. Danny Faulkner thinks that God created all those comets and dirty snowballs. That's what the world calls them. I agree with them. I don't think God created ugly-looking things like that floating through space. They think God created the moon pockmarked. Now, Michael Oher doesn't like that idea either, so he thinks an asteroid hit the Earth and pummeled the moon. So, I hope at some point we get enough. When you have a bias, and all of us have a bias, I have a bias. It's hard to break free of that. And Baumgartner is a great dude, but it'd be hard for him to. He's been teaching this. He's been pushing this for so long. He gave an entire talk 2 years ago, a year ago, in 2021, using his model to explain the sediments, because they can't. He's appealing to a model. He spent an entire talk on it. And I'm telling you, as an engineer, it's like, I'm sorry, that's zero evidence for your claim. You're relying on a model that only you developed, that very few people have validated, and it's a model, so it's not going to work, and you're relying on miracles, so it's totally not scientific, and entire talks are dedicated to that. The hydroplate theory explains where the sediments came from.
So, a question about asteroids.
Okay.
So about 5% of the asteroids are high iron nickel. Right? And in one of your slides, you talked about the lithosphere as possibly high enough iron nickel, maybe, to produce that. But it would make more sense to me that it would come from the outer core of the Earth, because that's high iron nickel. And so I guess the question is, it wouldn't seem as though the erosion that would occur by the supercritical water would go low enough. In other words, it would remain in the outer mantle, not into the outer core. And so how would the hydroplate explain that small percentage of extremely high, obviously melted iron and nickel as part of the asteroids? Because it doesn't seem like it would separate out from rock material that would be in the outer mantle. Is that the other side?
Yeah, but I'd have to look at that, because you're saying there's a certain percentage content of iron and nickel.
Well, there are like 5% that are basically just iron and nickel almost.
5% 5% of the comets and asteroids.
Not the asteroids.
Okay. And what you're saying then is that 5% would be hard to get from
Well, how would it
subterranean?
separate from the rock as it's going out? It would seem like it would have to originate, if it originated from the Earth, it'd have to come from the outer core versus the outer mantle, which is closer to where the supercritical water is.
Yeah.
So
So the question is can you have iron?
how do you have that unique separation that occurs in 5% plus
Okay.
of the asteroids? And that, it just seems like it would just still remain a mix of all of the rock and silicates and all the other stuff that is part of the outer mantle.
Okay, so yeah, I do not know the answer to that. That's a great question for.
Probably Rob might have an idea.
Yeah, that's a good one to ask. And again, I mean, I'd like to look into it, and I could ask people I know that know more about that aspect, that are more qualified to answer that question than me.
Because if it did originate from the Earth, there has to be then an explanation for its source.
Yeah. So, and again, I don't know about what that issue is, and I definitely have to look into it. But would it falsify it? I doubt it, because you have so much more evidence for all the materials that they do find in comets that there's no way that, how could that happen out in the outer space? Things like olivine and limestone and humanite that requires a massive amount of temperature. And where does the energy and power, unless God created them like that? But why would he create them with this stuff in them and dirty snowballs that eventually they evaporate after so many times around the sun, that is comets? To me, there's just too much. There's so much evidence of things that make sense coming from the Earth. So the only way that I think to get around that is to do like what Faulkner did and says, well, God has created it with that material in it. But to your point, that might be a good one for Rob. And hopefully I'll remember and we can talk about it after your meeting and see how he answered that. Yes?
Did you say they found bacteria?
Yeah, they also found bacteria. Yeah, living bacteria.
Space station.
Yeah. So the bacteria, Danny Faulkner will argue that was just a false finding. That's convenient enough, but after a certain amount of time, how many times do you have to make an excuse? And because that's his, he doesn't believe it. He believes that they misidentified both the space station and the bacteria that Fred Hoyle reported on in his paper a while ago. So they just don't believe it's actually bacteria that's misidentified. Maybe, but how many times? I'm sorry, go ahead.
So, if you were to give us an explanation of hydroplate theory, what it is, in about a minute that we could take away, what would it be?
Okay. Man, that's a good question. There's a crack. The Earth has a crack around the Earth. The Earth has a crack that goes all the way around the Earth like a seam on a baseball. The Bible talks about the fountains of the great deep breaking forth and unleashing. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Where'd that rain come from, by the way? How can it rain for 40 days and 40 nights? So, hydroplate theory says you had the fountains of great deep from subterranean water. It was the start of the flood, and it inundated the world with sediments and water, and it sent a whole bunch of that water and rocks and material up into space, pockmarked the moon, caused comets and asteroids that are still crashing back to Earth today. That would be my best attempt without thinking of a 1-minute answer. I'm glad you asked that, so next time I get this, I'll try to have a summary. But that would be one way to say it. I think the coolest thing about the hydroplate theory is the idea that comets and asteroids all came from Earth, from beneath the Earth's surface. Nobody really has ever heard that idea before, but it makes sense if you have this crack spewing up all this subterranean water. And we have all kinds of science that you've probably seen where they've discovered oceans under the surface of the Earth that they've reported on for off and on for quite some time. There's a recent report of a whole big ocean that they found again, a bunch of water under the surface of the Earth. So that's more details I don't want to get into, but yeah, I'm sorry I don't have probably an ideal answer for that. But.
Yeah, I like the hydroplate theory, but when I'm trying to convey it to other Christians, I have trouble a lot of times. So presenting to them the difference between CPT and HPT. They both see them as a rapid process, so hey, what's the difference? So yeah, I was wondering if there's a follow-up on this, a short way that I can convey the difference to them and why HPT is better.
Okay, so how I would, if I had to convey that in a couple minutes, I'd probably blow it because I'd be, there's so many thoughts in my head. Catastrophic plate tectonics relies on a secular idea, plate tectonics. It starts from there. Hydroplate theory starts from the Bible. It starts from many passages and makes one assumption only, and that's subterranean water. But that's a pretty good assumption because the Bible pretty much indicates subterranean water. And then from that point forward, Walt Brown was able to use physics and not miracles to make this happen, and descriptions in the Bible of the fountains of the great deep described in Genesis chapter 7, and how the waters continue to rise and prevail even more greatly and cover the mountains. Catastrophic plate tectonics thinks that we already had an existing ocean with existing basalt, volcanic rock. So they think that, there's volcanic activity well before the flood. And I submit that Tim Claridge's data does not show that very well, even though they tried to use that as an argument in one of the creation journals. Very little volcanic material in his lower.
It's all in the 5th and 6th.
Exactly. And guess what? That's when Claridge said that catastrophic plate tectonics start. So apparently, according to Edward Isaacs, it's not okay for hydroplate to start at that same time. It's a totally flawed argument in that magazine's article. So I'm drifting again, sorry, but I believe hydroplate theory is stronger biblically and scientifically. Predictions are the hard currency of science. Hydroplate theory made predictions that have been borne out. The Pacific crust coming in, subducting in. The Atlantic crust, being able to have the Atlantic crust bulge up and actually predict that you'd find missing crust in the Atlantic. He made predictions about the asteroids. There's a lot of predictions Walt Brown made before they were realized. Who would have expected to find an Earth rock on the moon? I love that argument. What is an Earth rock doing on the moon? That means there's lots of Earth rocks. What are Earth rocks doing on the moon?
NASA hid it for 50 years.
Yes.
They didn't tell us for 50 years.
Yeah, in next conference, I'll be asking Danny this because we had an email exchange, and he said, well, Earth's rocks could occasionally achieve escape velocity and hit the moon. It's like, well, wait a minute, Danny, I thought you told me like 2 weeks ago in another thread that rocks can't escape Earth's velocity. Now they can, because that's how that rock got to the moon. It's really hard to defend or to argue against that rock coming from the Earth from a catastrophic plate tectonics or an anti-hydroplate theory point of view. And you have an enormous hostility to the hydroplate theory from the older guard. I will say that I'm shocked at the borderline vitriol that you get within the hydroplate theory on the CRS net. Yes?
I'd like to put forth a challenge here rather than a question. And I would do the same thing if you had the astronomers here trying to deal with the starlight and time problem, the distant starlight problem. It would be great if various sides on an issue could get together in a room together and actually take a few days to start really going through all this with the computer, internet, whiteboard, and the whole works. Now I realize logistically and financially this is almost impossible, but we have something today, Zoom and other related things, that you can do this through the internet. So, like you and Larry and the CPT people and Walt Brown and the other various, major theories were to get together in a bunch of Zoom meetings, which has a whiteboard. And you got the internet right there, so you can pull up this and that and screen share and start discussing these things with a lot of listening and a lot of humility and a lot of prayer. And I think we see a lot more progress and can happen as opposed to CRSNet and various discussions through the journals.
I think it's a wonderful idea. If somebody could get that going, they actually had the flood review where they did try this kind of in a big forum called the Flood Review. And you still had a lot of butting heads. It would be great to try that. I agree with you 100%. if both sides would show some humility, again, there's a lot of politics involved. There's false accusations that have occurred unfortunately, there's a lot of drama that happens because we're fallen humans. And, Walt Brown was accused of trying to sue ICR, which is never true. It never happened. And yet you still have people that still promote that lie, even when they're confronted on it. And even to say, okay, where's your evidence that that ever happened? And by the way, so-and-so and so-and-so doesn't believe that. They realize that that wasn't true. They've come out and admitted it. But you still have some major creation scientists will still. So you have that kind of problem going on, and I'm not the one to solve that. It's tough. They've tried this, and whether or not it'll work, there's some bad blood out there.
It seems the closer you get to doing things in person, the better it works. If everybody's going through
I agree. Because I don't think the flood review was in person. I don't think. Were you familiar with that, Rich? Because they did try.
In person is almost impossible today.
Yeah. But you do the Zoom, and you don't have, because you can be more vitriolic with email, and it's just the nature of the beast. And it's like, man, did I write that? I wish I had slept on that before I hit send, Whereas that happens a lot less often if you're in person. So.
Or you can see each other and actually hear each other.
Yeah. Yeah. And we got to get to you because I know you've been raising your hand a lot. So then I'll get to you. Yes?
Okay, so with the image that you have up there, when you look at certain earthquake patterns, it's interesting how they repeat over and over. But in the Pacific Ring of Fire area, they initiate with deep earthquakes, and then that leads within a few days to larger surface quakes, and then they spread out around the globe with activity along all those ridge lines. But what puzzles me, I don't know if you have the answer to this, is when it gets over on the western side of North America, all of a sudden activity is generated around the craton boundary, and you'll see quake activity just going like dominoes around the craton. I was never even really aware of the importance of it until I realized that the New Madrid quake in 1812, I thought, why did that happen there? But it's on the southern edge of the craton. So I was wondering if you have any ideas on why that happened.
Yeah, that was.
It's all along the same.
There's a 64 spreading.
Well, yeah, just it's something, the ring, yes, along the faults, some of them are along the San Andreas, but they're not all on fault lines either, though. That's where you have, secular scientists have trouble with the deep earthquakes, but part of that is, we believe, from the hydroplate theory, and just from, I don't even know if it's a hydroplate theory thing, it's the crossover depth with the magma. If you look at the crossover depth, the number of earthquakes, and I have the chart, but I don't have it on my slides, you see a lot of earthquakes above the crossover depth. And then when you get to the crossover depth, you have very few. And then you see a whole bunch, then it starts to build up again beneath the crossover depth for deep earthquakes.
What's the crossover depth?
220 miles.
Okay, so when I'm referring to that, it's usually between 200 and 600 kilometers.
Okay.
Just to define it a little bit. So that's kind of in that range.
Yeah, it would be. So.
820 miles is about 200 miles.
Yep. 600.
1,200 kilometers.
Okay.
Do you think that, a lot of, when they look at translations of the word rocket, which you talked about as being firmament, that's, of course, in the King James that translates it that way, but most of the other versions translate it as space. And so, if you take it as space, then the argument of water below the crust and above the crust kind of go away. I mean, that's what Humphreys does when he's looking at the waters for use for creation on verse 2 of chapter 1, where waters are in outer space or on the earth. And so, to me, you're going to then make your assumptions for the theory that you're trying to work with could be a different outcome. I mean, Humphreys probably would disagree just on that point alone.
Yes,
And so he's...
yeah, and we disagreed with him on his point because I would recommend if you can go to rsr.org/Rakia or do firmament, Rakia, R-A-Q-I-A. And there's a Bible study there on why we believe it's the crust of the earth. I think it's very compelling, but I realize it's not going to convince everybody. Everybody has a different take. When it talks about the firmament, before it gets to Genesis chapter 1, verse 11, where I think it talks about the firmament of the heavens. That is in space, but that's a different firmament. And why does God qualify it, change it from the firmament, and then all of a sudden change it to the firmament of the heavens and qualify it with that extra description? We believe they're two different firmaments. But again, you can find more details at rsr.org/Rakia, R-A-Q-I-A. And I think Bobby Nair makes an excellent point there. Because atheists will make fun of the whole dome thing and the firmament being in the heavens, the ones talked about in Genesis 1-2. Well, they don't, we believe the Bible says that the firmament is the crust of the earth. The firmament, Genesis 1, early 1. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Yeah, Fred, a couple of comments and then a question. The hydroplate theory is not trying to invalidate any miracles, from my understanding. It's not appealing to miracles like CPT does. It's just a scientific approach as to what happened after the miracle of the flood just coming about. God informing Noah that he needed to build an ark, having all these animals come, closing the door, taking care of Noah and his family on that ark for the whole time. That
Great point. Yeah. So hydroplate doesn't dispute the miracles that are explicitly called out in the Bible, like how God brought the animals to Noah. It definitely does not.
Yeah.
It just says that, and Henry Morris agreed from that slide I showed you, that we don't need to appeal to miracles as a rescue device. And Henry Morris used those same words too. Try to avoid using miracles as a rescue device in your science, because God's really good at using natural processes He created. The scientific laws God created, He's really good at using those. But when there's a miracle, He usually explicitly calls it out, and you have to make assumptions when you start piling in miracles to explain something that you don't understand.
Right. The other thing was, I'm glad you brought out the angular momentum and the moon and the cultures around the earth having a 30-day calendar. That was a good explanation. I enjoyed that. Now, my question is, if CPT is true, I think the mountain ranges are just a little bit short in height, because we have a mantle or the outer crust is about 60 miles thick, and if they're subducting over one another, if they split in half, that's a 30-mile rise. I'm thinking those mountain ranges fall a little short.
So I've never heard an attempt by catastrophic plate tectonics to explain the 365-day year. And it'd be interesting to see them, make that attempt, but I haven't seen that.
Yeah, but the mountain ranges with CPT, Everest is only at 28,000. I'm thinking if we're subducting, we ought to have higher mountains than we do. So.
Yeah, good point. Yes?
Okay, one more question. One more.
They just realize that there are millions of acre feet of water stored in the base of rock. You can see this, you go to the top of the Grand Mesa on the west side. There's a river flowing down the mountain there, on the side of the mountain, and a base on top. And also in this neighborhood, there's a place called 1,000 Falls, where birds of water can get out of that fall. They can make the water come out constantly, right at that rock.
Okay, interesting. Yep.
Let me go ahead and close in prayer, and then if you want to have a discussion with Fred, please do so. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this opportunity to get together. We thank you for just the challenges that we can learn about begin to discuss. And I think that's good. I mean, the idea of just simply trading thoughts and having conversations and trying to apologetically answer different questions. We saw that today. And Lord, whether we agree, disagree is not really the issue, but we do this in a fellowship in which we can hopefully learn more about what you've done, how you've done it. And in the end, that we will be blessed by the fact that you are indeed the creator of all. We pray this in your name. Amen.